Let's begin this bulletin now by getting you all the updates about the chaos and violence which unfolded in Washington, D.C. We saw violence, tear gas, bullets and fire all reported in the U.S. Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. Rioters overwhelmed the Capitol Police and stormed the Congress building. The pro-Trump supporters were trying to interrupt the certification of Joe Biden's Electoral College win. But the interruption threw the U.S. Capitol into a deadly spiral of chaos and violence. Lawmakers, staff and reporters were forced to shelter in place and several House office buildings were evacuated due to potential bomb threats. Vice President Mike Pence was also pulled from the Senate chamber, but the situation quickly spun out of control as protesters breached the Capitol, entering the Senate chamber and streaming through the statutory hall. One man even sat in the very seat that Pence had been sitting in just a few minutes before, while another was in Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office. Lawmakers, reporters and staffers sheltered throughout the building as pro-Trump rioters banged on doors and shouted slogans. At one point, gunfire was heard inside the Capitol as Capitol Police officers barricaded the doors to the House chamber. The police later confirmed one person was shot and killed, although the circumstances of that shooting have yet to be released. Tear gas was also deployed and an improvised explosive device was found on the Capitol grounds. And by mid-afternoon, the National Guard was called up to help suppress the unrest, nearly 2 hours after the first reports of the breach. What unfolded at Capitol Hill was a culmination of months of Trump's tweets and a speech right before the violence erupted. Listen to this.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing, and stolen by the fake news media. That's what they've done and what they're doing. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about.
World leaders, the NATO chief and his own team members reacted to this brazen display of anarchy on American soil. Members of the U.S. Congress also called on Donald Trump to stop the rioters. After much chaos and violence, Trump finally said this.
This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
President-elect Joe Biden described the chaos as an unprecedented assault of American undertakings. He also said that the authorities struggled to take control of a chaotic situation at the Capitol that led to the evacuation of lawmakers.
Let me be very clear. The scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not reflect a true America, do not represent who we are. What we're seeing are a small number of extremists dedicated to lawlessness. This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. And it must end now.
We are also getting reports that Twitter has now blocked Donald Trump's account for 12 hours as of now, and Instagram will also be blocking Donald Trump's account for a period of 24 hours. We are now being joined live by international affairs expert Stephen Golub from California. Stephen, let's start our discussion by talking about the constitutional course that these events will eventually take. Many Trump staffers are planning to resign, while others are planning to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove Trump from office. Tell us more about the same.
Well, I'll get to that in just a moment. The biggest news, the reason why we're talking about invoking the 25th Amendment, which entitles the vice president and the majority of the cabinet basically to remove the president from office, is because the president of the United States is deranged and dangerous. He's always been an unstable personality. He's always been intensely narcissistic. According to many reports, even psychopathic in some of the ways he views the world, he relates to the world. But it's really been ramped up recently since his loss. There are reports from CNN and other sources of his own loyalists, his own staff saying that he's lost it, that he's ranting and raving, that he's out of control. In other words, he's dangerous, and what that could mean on the international stage or in terms of fomenting more violence in the U.S. is really, really frightening. As to your question, there are two ways of possibly removing him now. One is impeachment. The House of Representatives would vote by majority to remove him from office, but then it would really trigger a trial in the Senate that would involve a 2/3 vote. It's possible, it's conceivable that all that could happen, but that would be an unwieldy process, and whether the Republican-controlled Senate would go along with that is another matter. Getting back to the 25th Amendment, as I described, that's a way to go. I personally feel that one or the other of these things have to happen because he really is acting in a very, very unstable manner, and this is a president who, among other things, has his fingers on our nuclear codes.
Right.
But whether the 25th Amendment would be invoked remains to be seen. There's definitely talk in the air, but it would need half of his cabinet agreeing to it, and these are people who are not just loyalists, but they've bought into all sorts of Trump propaganda along the way and tied their careers to him. I'm hoping it will happen. I'm not sure. It is possible.
Right. Now, Stephen, just elaborating on what you just said, it is evident that Trump clearly incited his supporters, and what followed was armed violence, making a mockery of democracy and law and order. Will the law now bow down to President Trump's whims and fancies? He still hasn't, after all, conceded defeat.
Right. He, not only did he incite this march on the Capitol, and the one slight respect in which I want to perhaps give him the benefit of the doubt is that did he know that people would actually go into the Capitol, create a riot, act violently, put the lives of all sorts of folks in the Capitol, including our senators and congresspeople, at risk? I'm not sure. The more dangerous thing, in some ways, indicative thing, is that after all this happened, he praised the very criminals, the insurrectionists, really, the rioters who did all this. He praised them. He called them great people, great Americans, patriots, et cetera, et cetera. For him to do that was, in a sense, both dangerous and immoral, but also a violation of his oath as president to uphold and protect the Constitution of the U.S., when his very supporters were seeking to undo the Constitution of the U.S. Ironically, their invasion of the Capitol was to try to disrupt, and they did temporarily disrupt, the process of finally confirming Joe Biden as the president-elect.
Right. Now, Stephen, Twitter has blocked Trump, as has Instagram, and global leaders have reacted to the chaos as well. So what lies ahead for President Trump and his administration as of now?
Whoa, that's a really good question. I wish I had a great answer, a decent answer for it. It's a big unknown. It depends. Will there be actions to try to invoke the 25th Amendment? Will there be an attempt to impeach him? Will there be, and this perhaps is the most likely scenario, although I'm just guessing, will there be informal ways within the military, within his own administration, to rein him in so that he can't do something very, very dangerous? I don't know. He still has this huge platform by virtue of being president, even if Twitter has laudably finally cut him off or temporarily done so. But he still has the capacity to incite people to further violence and do things that we may not even be able to imagine right now, because a lot of what he's done over the past 4 years, including most recently, are things we never thought we'd see a president of the United States doing to begin with.
Right. Now, we also are getting reports that the public emergency in Washington has been extended for 15 more days. So that is after Joe Biden's inauguration. So is more violence expected, and what kind of punishment can be meted out to the armed supporters who even shot and killed a woman inside Capitol Hill?
Well, this is one really big question mark is why these people were able to flood into the U.S. Capitol to begin with. Certainly everyone knew that this was a potential problem. Why weren't there adequate Capitol Police, National Guard, other people there to prevent that from happening? And why were so many people allowed to simply walk away from that whole scene afterwards and not being arrested for what they did? I think that we do have all sorts of videos of people. Maybe some could be tracked down through that. Some people who were actually arrested within the Capitol itself will certainly be prosecuted. It remains to be seen for what. In terms of their potential more violence, Maybe this will temporarily die down. It could depend on what Trump does or doesn't do going forward. But he certainly could incite people again. And among many other ways in which he can incite people, there's the possibility that he'll spark protests and violence. Protests is too kind of word. Riots and mob violence on the day of Joe Biden's inauguration, 2 weeks from now, January 20th.
Right. Stephen, my final question before we wrap up our discussion. The Senate lawmakers are still certifying the Electoral College votes from different states. So will President Trump present any more hurdles in the process before he leaves the White House finally?
Basically, no. What they're doing now is normally just a pro forma process. Congress is just an approval, or not even approval, just firming the votes that have already been certified on a state level. Ordinarily, it's a quick vote. Some of Trump's supporters in the Senate and the House of Representatives, who are partly responsible for this as well, because they're legitimizing these, or trying to legitimize these completely bogus charges that the election was stolen. Trump appointed judges, Trump supporters on local levels who are local election officials, and many other officials have said, no, this was an honest. They're trying to, his supporters in the Senate and House are trying to use what's normally just a routine procedure to raise the issue of a bogus election one more time. Some of them because they're planning on running in 2024 for president, and they're using this to try to gin up support for them. But basically, at the end of this period, which could be sometime tomorrow at the rate this thing is going, Joe Biden, the last stage of confirming Joe Biden as the president-elect of the United States will have been completed.
Right, Stephen, thank you so much for staying with us on this broadcast, and thank you for all your inputs.